All right, we're still discussing the very frightening and disturbing possibility that pockets of feral people still exist in deep wilderness areas up and down the Appalachian Mountains and foothills. This is episode 18, part 3. I encourage you to watch parts 1 and 2. If you have not, go to my TikTok page or my YouTube channel. Also, it would help me out so much, and I would be so grateful if you'll hit the follow button, the subscribe button, the like button. By all means, share my episodes with somebody you think would be interested. Repost my episodes, and I want to see the comments and discussion. Just be nice. It's free to be a decent person and discuss things in an adult, civil manner. Quick recap of parts 1 and 2. We discussed the phenomena of feral people in general, and then we discussed some characteristics, and we'll get into those again, but characteristics that were derived from the body of testimony and the body of evidence. And I started in part 1 telling you the story of James, who in the spring of 1978 hiked deep into the western North Carolina wilderness to camp, and he had an experience with feral people. I believe that 100%. I finished James' story up in part 2, and now in part 3, we're just going to discuss everything in general again and talk about why it's possible, and I'll tell you about an experience that I had. I don't mean to suggest that the phenomena of feral people is endemic just to Appalachia, the American South, as though I'm making fun of somebody or saying that people, mountain people or southern people are more likely to become feral. That's ridiculous. That's nonsense. That's all I'll say about that. I'm not going to make fun of my own people. I'm a curious person. I'm a researcher and an investigator, and this subject caught my attention, and I started wanting some answers. The phenomena of feral people is worldwide, and reports and discussion of feral people go back into antiquity. Now, these areas that has this concentration of reports, they all have something in common. Vast areas of uninhabited wildernesses of some type or another. Appalachian Mountains, Appalachian foothills, absolutely the case. Vast wilderness. Most of Appalachia is still wilderness. And I go on record with great confidence as saying there's parts of Appalachia where no man or woman has ever stepped. You could hide a herd of woolly mammoths out there for all we know. I'm not suggesting that. That's hyperbole. But you could have woolly mammoths out there and they might never be detected. In other words, there's no telling what's hidden in this vast wilderness that we don't know about yet. And we certainly don't know everything that we think we know. The Appalachian Mountains run for 2,000 miles, for crying out loud. So you look at everything and you boil it down to its simplest form. There are more than just a few reports. And these reports, this isn't a recent thing. They go back more than 100 years. The Appalachian wilderness itself is more than capable of sustaining these pockets of feral people. The available building materials in the Appalachian hardwood forest is great, and a primitive people would know how to make shelter out of these materials to get away from the elements. Then you factor in that there's vast cave systems, and also dotted on the landscape up and down the mountains and foothills are these abandoned homesteads, barns. There's way out in the middle of nowhere. I've run across them. The available food in the Appalachian Mountains and foothills. The diversity of animal life is great and plentiful, and also there's the plants. Very, very biodiverse area in terms of plants for food and for medicine. But it's the disappearances that propel me more than anything else. There's some famous cases. One of these cases is the very tragic case of Dennis Lloyd Martin, a little 6-year-old boy who in June of 1969, while in the Great Smoky Mountains, he just vanished, while within yards of his family. Some odd things about that case, but one of the things that gets my attention the most is the fact that from the highest levels of government, the Special Forces out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, was ordered to the Great Smoky Mountains to look for this little boy. The Green Berets got there and they informed the authorities and they informed the people running the searches. They said, we won't be a part of you. We've hired a couple of guides. We're going out by ourselves. And it is said that they did in fact encounter feral people, and it is also said that they killed some feral people. And I tend to believe that. That's certainly not the kind of thing that our government is going to admit to, obviously, but that's well within reason to believe that. the amazing thing is this: the total number of feral people would be very, very minuscule compared to the population. These scant numbers of feral people spread out over such a vast wilderness, yet there's still all of these reports. Now, we have in our society a certain segment that no matter what, if something falls outside of that box of approved stuff, then they're not going to believe it. And worse yet, they will make fun of people. They will ridicule people. They will call people liars. They will call people stupid. And nobody wants to be treated like that. That's why the vast majority of people who encounter extraordinary things just keep it to themselves. I have learned this after 3.5, 4 years of interviewing witnesses. Nobody wants to be made fun of or ridiculed or called a liar. Imagine if everybody who's had experiences out of the ordinary came forward and talked about it. Now, the testimony of witnesses, we see similarities spanning the spectrum. We see, in many cases, great detail, specific detail provided, to include from my witness, James. People report across the board these deformed facial features, twisted bodies and spines, oddly enough, cataracts, very thick, white, milky cataracts, thinning, sparse, stringy hair, unclothed or clothed in rags, odd hairiness on their bodies, strange vocal, guttural grunts and sounds, people hearing an unknown language and then hearing these clicks and tree knocks and whistles and things like that, that apparently is the way that they would communicate at distance. The bottom line is that it is well within reason that isolated people can and probably do survive in the Appalachian Mountains. Now, on to my experience. In May of 2021, I was invited to western Rutherford County to investigate a cave, this small cave. Now, this cave had been revealed after a controlled burn. There was a lot of foliage there. I believe they said there were some rhododendron bushes, very thick. The controlled burn burned all that away, and there was the cave. So I, along with a group of people, went to explore it. Now, on the way there, after it was in the wilderness, we got very lucky. We discovered a single track. Now, you have to keep in mind, on the forest floor of the Appalachian hardwood belt, it's very difficult to find a track, much less a track with detail, due to the leaf litter and the debris and the weather. But we got very lucky, and we found a single track. Now, the maker of this track had apparently stepped over a log, barefooted, stepped over a log, and there was a giant patch of what's called ground cedar. It's a spreading ground cover. But as they stepped over the log, they slipped. And at the terminus of that slippage, they left an absolutely beautiful track. 8.5 inches long, definitely human. But two odd things about the track. The toes were splayed like this. Our feet, because we wear shoes, our toes are like this. Their toes were splayed. But more importantly, that track, this person was completely and overtly flat-footed and compared to the length, an extraordinary width to the track. After doing some research and talking to some people in the know, that's a sign of a person who has went their whole life walking barefooted. Now, what regular person out of our society would be walking around the forest in the middle of nowhere in the Appalachians without shoes on? Our modern, tender, vulnerable feet could never do that. We don't have the calluses, but somebody who has done it their whole life is going to have very, very tough feet. So we have to explain this track. Now, the cave itself, the entrance in and out, there was great wear. It was obviously made by flat-footedness. It wasn't animal hooves or claws. So something was going in and out of that cave. It has to be explained. So what's the takeaway from this? Well, why would people go feral? Well, a lot of reasons. They just get isolated, or there's some isolated cases of maybe people who isolated themselves for religious reasons. But it is more than possible. Now, I don't mean to suggest that we bother these people or try to harm them or capture them in any way. We leave them alone. But I'm saying this: if you're a hiker or a camper or you're prone to be out there in the wilderness, just be careful and be aware. I appreciate all of you. I'll see you next time.